to the border. Vice President Kamala Harris travels to Texas. What she's saying about the immigration debate. Infrastructure deal. Why the bipartisan agreement may still face hurdles on Capitol Hill. Opinion poll. Where Americans stand on abortion. And Vatican position. Why the Holy See says it is reluctant to speak out about Hong Kong. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, June 25th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Vice President Kamala Harris pays a visit to the U.S.-Mexico border, traveling to El Paso, Texas. She's been criticized from members of both parties for not going sooner. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, the vice president's trip comes as record numbers of migrants attempt to cross into the U.S. Now, Republicans say the administration has been weak on protecting the U.S. southern border.
I said back in March I was going to come to the border, so this is not a new plan.
Defending the timing of her arrival in El Paso, Vice President Kamala Harris, leading the Biden administration's response to a steep increase in migration, tells reporters she's been looking at the causes and effects of migration and says her earlier work in Guatemala and Mexico led up to today.
So I'm glad to be here. It was always the plan to come here, and I think we're going to have a good and productive day.
Joining the Vice President, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, who slammed Congress for inaction.
Congress has failed to pass any significant change in immigration laws in 35 years. We have a broken immigration system.
Today's stop included a tour of a Customs and Border Protection Processing Center. The Vice President also met with faith-based organizations, including the Catholic Diocese of El Paso.
If you don't mind me quoting scripture, go for it. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God.
And she told them the Biden administration
is working to build a fair and a functional and a humane immigration system. We feel very strongly about that.
After delaying more than 3 months, Vice President Harris is finally headed to the border today. We're excited about that.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy told reporters he hoped she'd talk to border agents and listen to them as well, but also emphasized the days that have gone by.
She avoided traveling to the border for more than 90 days. In that short amount of time of more than 3 months, there's been more than 500,000 encounters.
The vice president also said the Biden administration, quote, inherited a tough situation, end quote. And she blamed former President Donald Trump's policies for the situation at the border. He, in turn, blasts the Biden administration for what he calls a border catastrophe. And former President Trump plans on visiting the southern border very soon. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
President Biden claimed victory on a bipartisan infrastructure plan worth nearly $600 billion in new spending. But the next step, selling skeptical senators to sign on, may be tough, while simultaneously advancing a reconciliation bill that could total around $6 trillion. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
The success and failure of the two bills are definitely linked. Democratic leadership tells me the bipartisan proposal won't become law unless a much larger $6 trillion reconciliation package comes along with it.
Both tracks, the bipartisan track and the budget reconciliation track, are proceeding apace.
Even West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin told me there will be a reconciliation package.
There's going to be a reconciliation, though. We just don't know what size it's going to be.
The new $1.2 trillion bipartisan 8-year plan includes $109 billion for roads, bridges, and major projects, $49 billion for transit, $66 billion for rail, and $7.5 billion for electric vehicle infrastructure, a key President Biden priority. The plan also includes billions for airports and waterway improvements, along with broadband. But the deal is far from done. Hours after the president and lawmakers announced a deal, the president threatened he would not sign the bipartisan bill unless Republicans agree to his tax plan, which Republicans say is non-negotiable.
The top two Democrats literally pull the rug out from under their bipartisan negotiators with these unserious demands before they'd even made it down to the White House. That's not the way to show you're serious about getting a bipartisan outcome.
Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the 21 senators who had negotiated the bipartisan deal, said in a tweet, quote, "No deal by extortion. It was never suggested to me during these negotiations that President Biden was holding hostage the bipartisan infrastructure proposal unless a liberal reconciliation package was also passed." House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy thinks the bill is dead in the water.
It's one big deal, so it's not separated. I don't see any Republicans supporting that structure. I actually think the Speaker's trying to kill it.
Bottom line, the celebration is short-lived, and we're all waiting to see what will happen when the Senate returns back to the Hill in 2 weeks. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A former Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, was sentenced today in a Minnesota courtroom to 22 and a half years in prison. Chauvin was convicted in the murder of George Floyd. An appeal is expected. In Surfside, Florida, officials say 159 people remain unaccounted for following yesterday's partial collapse of a residential beachfront building. The death toll has risen to at least 4. Rescue crews continue to work in dangerous rubble seeking survivors. Well, a new AP NORC poll indicates 61% of Americans approve of abortion legality in the first trimester. Catholic University's Michael New points out that pro-life alternatives abound.
Women who are struggling or hurting financially, I would really encourage them to seek out the Catholic Church if they're of faith, or seek out one of our 3,000 pregnancy help centers that are across the country that offer a very wide range of services to pregnant women.
In the same poll, Americans oppose second and third trimester abortions by 65% and 80%, respectively. Our Catholic bishops are criticizing a declaration the European Parliament that abortion is essential health care. Some of the EU ministers went on to describe conscience clauses as a denial of medical care. Although the declaration is non-binding, it is considered influential. With the approval of a 62% majority, Gibraltar will ease its abortion law. It will permit an abortion for a mother's health or for risk of a prenatal fatality up to 12 weeks into pregnancy. Just over half of the eligible voters participated in the referendum. And for more information on both of these stories, visit our online partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. A rare tornado brought severe destruction to the southeastern Czech Republic. The storm killed at least 5, injured hundreds, and left more than 120,000 people without power. Rescue efforts continue in several badly damaged localities. In Canada, at least 600 unmarked human remains have been confirmed at a second residential school run by the Catholic Church.
You're going to notice that they are in proper order. These that lay here are 1 meter by 1 meter apart in some cases. We cannot affirm that they are all children. Church.
The Archbishop of Regina, Saskatchewan, has posted an online apology to the Cowessess First Nation. Pope Francis says to Lutherans, Christ accompanies us on our journey toward communion.
E questo cammino soltanto se fa in crisi.
Meeting with representatives of the Lutheran World Federation, the Holy Father encouraged Lutherans and Catholics to continue to tread the path from conflict to communion. A senior Vatican official says that he and many of his colleagues at the Secretariat of State have yet to be convinced that speaking out on the situation in Hong Kong would make any difference whatsoever. EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. Colm, great to see you. So can you tell us more about the situation?
Good evening, Tracy. Yes, I can. Well, Archbishop Paul Gallagher, who is the Secretariat of State at the Vatican, essentially the foreign minister of the Vatican, he said in an interview this morning that he and many of his colleagues have yet to be convinced that speaking publicly about the situation in Hong Kong, quote, would make any difference whatsoever. At a press conference today, when he was asked why the Vatican was speaking out against the civil unrest, for example, in Lebanon, but not in Hong Kong, he replied that the Secretariat of State did not see that it could make a positive contribution in Hong Kong. He said, quote, obviously Hong Kong is the object of concern for us. Lebanon is a place where we perceive that we can make a positive contribution. We do not perceive that in Hong Kong, end quote. He went on to say that obviously they are concerned about the situation and that there are a lot of words which they could say that would be appreciated by the international press and in other parts of the world, but felt it wouldn't make a real difference to the people of Hong Kong.
Colm, I'm wondering, has there been mounting pressure on the Vatican to make a statement about, what is happening in Hong Kong?
Yeah, there really has. Human rights activists have urged the Vatican to publicly express its concerns about the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, both in mainland China and in Hong Kong. For example, Benedict Rogers, the founder of Hong Kong Watch, told EWTN's Catholic News Agency that it would make a big difference if the Pope were to pray publicly for the Uyghurs, Christians in China and the people of Hong Kong. He pointed out that the current Pope is particularly outspoken on issues of persecution, injustice and conflict in places all over the world, and said that it was really puzzling why there's this almost complete silence on everything to do with China. But of course, Tracy, you have to remember that the Vatican is walking a tightrope when it comes to China. Last year, they re-signed a very controversial agreement on the selection and election of Catholic bishops in the country. And we reported here on News Nightly of the news that China had been hacking Vatican computers and gathering information. So it would seem like the Vatican is deliberately deciding to remain silent on the issue of human rights in China so as not to damage the diplomatic ties that they have been so slowly building over the years.
Well, Colm, before I let you go, the U.S. Secretary of State, as you probably know, is due to visit the Vatican next week. Do we know if China will be up for discussion?
That's right, Tracy. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is scheduled to visit Vatican City on Monday. Now, the last time a U.S. Secretary of State visited the Vatican, it was Mike Pompeo under the Trump administration. And Mr. Pompeo had said that the Vatican had a moral duty to focus the world's attention on human rights violations, especially in regimes like China's. The new Secretary of State has too voiced his concerns over China when he spoke about the, quote, crimes against humanity that are happening there, as well as persecution of all different religious minorities. Now, the U.S. State Department has said that religious freedom and the climate crisis will be central topics in the meetings that will take place in the Vatican next week. Tracy?
Colm, thank you so much. Appreciate the report. Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom correspondent. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, new developments centered on the church in Germany. Pope Francis met yesterday with the head of the German Bishops' Conference at the Vatican. The Holy Father and Bishop Georg Bätzing met in a private audience yesterday. Afterward, Bishop Bätzing said he assured the Holy Father that rumors the German church was seeking to leave the worldwide church were untrue. Joining us now is A.C. Wimmer, editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency Deutsch. A.C., welcome back. Always good to be with you. So what more do we know about this meeting, and why did it take place now?
Those are two very pertinent questions, Tracy, and there's been a lot of speculation. However, the Vatican has made sure, when being asked about the whole meeting and whether these statements coming from the German Bishops' Conference were true by the National Catholic Register, to say that, well, we normally don't comment on these things. So what did the German Bishops' Conference say? Well, from what we know is that Pope Francis has encouraged Bishop Bätzing, the chairman of the German Bishops' Conference, to continue on the synodal path, but also that the Holy Father, I quote, was rather well aware of the situation in Germany. And yes, the word crisis is one that was used even in the statement.
Yeah, we know Bishop Bätzing has released a statement on that meeting. Has the Vatican said anything?
Well, apart from denying to say anything, they haven't really. As to whether that is inconvenient or not is beside the point, I'm afraid, because it is quite par for the course. Normally, when these audiences take place, unless there is a particular reason for the Holy See to issue a statement, there is nothing forthcoming. In this particular instance, of course, a meeting has been a long time coming. And to see it happening at this point in time, given all the recent developments in the German church that we've reported about and spoken on in this program, I'm sure that they were the ones that were discussed, in particular the question of the synodal process, as mentioned, but also the open rebellion by parts of the German church when it comes to the blessing of homosexual couples and intercommunion with Protestants.
And AC, do we know, is anything else scheduled between the Vatican and church leaders from Germany?
Well, there's going to have to be another ad limina meeting. Usually they take place within a certain amount of time as per canon law. The last one was in November of 2015, during which time Pope Francis already raised a number of the issues that were raised again and again, including in his letter to the German Catholics. As to whether that ad limina meeting is coming sooner or later, in particular with a view to the timing of the global synodal process that the Catholic Church is engaging in, is anyone's guess. However, having heard around the traps what people are saying, I think we're going to see a bit more stuff coming out between the lines, as it were, some informal diplomacy, rather than any pronouncements made publicly, statements coming forward either from the Holy See or from the German Bishops' Conference, who has all along said that Pope Francis has encouraged them on the synodal process, something Cardinal Marx said earlier on, even when the Vatican dashed some of the hopes about this process being something sui generis, something in particular and special for the German church, as it were, and also with a view to having it as a binding process. None of these things have come to pass, and yet the German bishops have repeatedly said we feel encouraged, notwithstanding some people raising, as you know, very serious concerns, not just bishops in Germany, but around the world.
Yeah, indeed. Something else I want to talk about, AC, is Cardinal Gerhard Muller from Germany, as you know, recently was appointed to the Vatican's highest court, its version of a Supreme Court. What more can you tell us about this appointment, and was it a surprise?
I think it was a massive surprise for a lot of observers in Germany, and I wonder whether the Cardinal himself might have been a bit surprised, notwithstanding the fact that when speaking to Vatican News, he said that this was clearly a sign of trust. I quote, "The Holy Father trusts me, not only as a person, but also as far as my competences are concerned." Now, as we know, Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller is not only the former prefect of the Congregational Doctrine of the Faith, he is also a dogmatics professor by training and a former bishop in Germany, in Regensburg and Bavaria. So he brings with him a lot of clout. And though he's not a trained Catholic canon lawyer per se, as a theologian, he says, and he himself thinks so, he can contribute an important theological dimension that one must always have in mind when dealing with canon law, particularly, I suppose, when you're dealing with the very highest ecclesiastical court the Catholic Church has.
Well, AC, unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. Always appreciate your time. Thank you so much. AC Wimmer, Editor-in-Chief of Catholic News Agency Deutsch. Thanks again.
Thank you kindly. God bless.
Up next, PTSD Awareness Day, how faith may help people recover. And learn about a new tribute to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia reports outlays of $4.8 million for those in need. During COVID-19 last year, more than 27,000 people received food, while funds for another 3,800 helped to pay for rent and utility bills. Well, Sunday is PTSD Awareness Day, and many people around the world suffer in silence from post-traumatic stress disorder. In the United States, an estimated 7.8% of Americans will experience PTSD at some point in their lives. But what exactly is PTSD, and are there ways that faith can help us in recovery. Joining us now is Allison Ricciardi, founder and president of CatholicTherapist.com. Allison, welcome back. Always great to see you. For those who may not be familiar, tell us what PTSD is and who it affects. I know it's commonly associated with those in the military, in particular combat situations, but they're not the only ones who suffer from it.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people kind of discount their own symptoms, thinking it wasn't as bad as being at war. But we would define a trauma as anything that is outside the normal range of human experience, something that we experience as inescapable, and something that overwhelms our ability to cope. So the symptoms you might see in somebody who's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder would be things like emotional numbing, flashbacks of the experience, nightmares, detachment from others, a sense of hopelessness. They're often very easily startled and frightened, very, on guard all the time. So, basically what's happening is when we have any experience, we process the memory, it gets stored in the hippocampus of the brain. But when something is traumatic, we bypass that and it goes to the amygdala of the brain, which is the most primitive part of the brain, is the fight or flight center. And it literally gets stuck there. So when it gets triggered, it's like they're experiencing it all over again. So sometimes going to therapy obviously can help, but I think unless the traumas are identified and treated specifically, sometimes people aren't getting better just talking about it. So I think understanding that, it could be growing up in an alcoholic or abusive household, because think about it, children don't have those coping abilities, so they're more easily vulnerable to trauma. And then people who have been traumatized are also more vulnerable because their coping skills are not necessarily what they need to be. So I think if we can recognize the signs in our loved ones, even the signs in ourselves, there are treatment modalities that are super effective. And, there's hope. There's, you don't have to be stuck with that the rest of your life.
Yeah, and Allison, I'm glad you brought that up about, growing up in an alcoholic family. A lot of people don't think about that. How common is PTSD? And also, what should you do if you or maybe a loved one are experiencing it?
Well, I think it's more, it's interesting you said 7 to 8%. I think it's actually probably higher than that, because a lot of people growing up have had traumatic events. Certainly we look at like sexual abuse, again, an angry or abusive parent. Like I said, seek out therapy. CatholicTherapist.com. We do list treatment modalities. Inquire with the therapist if they indeed do specific trauma treatment. But I think also bringing the faith into it, often inviting Jesus into those memories is another way of kind of reprocessing them to kind of really realize you weren't alone during that time, because obviously when somebody's traumatized, they feel very alone and very isolated. So that's part of the process, because ultimately he's our healer, all right? As therapists, we have techniques that work, but I think we really need to bring in the faith. We need to bring in prayer, the sacraments, because those are the things that truly heal us and set us free. He came to set us free, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Allison, what advice would you give to someone, who's struggling with PTSD and maybe they're reluctant to reach out for help for one reason or another? What would you say to them?
I would say don't be ashamed to ask for help. A lot of people are struggling. I think even what we've just been through with the pandemic, again, feeling overwhelmed and inescapable, was certainly outside of our normal range of human experience. So that's been a trigger for a lot of people who may have had trauma in the past. But get help, talk to somebody, because like I said, there are modalities that are available that can be really helpful, and you can be set free again. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We all get our bumps and bruises in life, but when something is traumatic, we really do need some help to get over that in order to be able to be free again. And there's life after trauma, all right? It doesn't necessarily have to define us, because once it's reprocessed, it becomes a distant memory again. I think we all have memories we can think of in the past, and some of them weren't pleasant, but they're not traumatic, all right? So when we can kind of like deactivate the trauma using things like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that's a very popular modality that can be used to help somebody to be able to be free again and to heal from that trauma.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. Really important. We appreciate it. Allison Ricciardi, founder and president of CatholicTherapist.com. Thanks again.
You're welcome. God bless.
And finally tonight, next Tuesday, will mark 70 years since Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI was ordained as a priest. His personal secretary is honoring the milestone.
To be a priest, for him, it's the most important thing of his life. He lived to be a priest, and then he lived as a priest. And for him, that's the most important thing. It's the continence of his whole life.
Archbishop Georg took part in an exhibit today in Rome dedicated to the Pope Emeritus and his ordination to the priesthood, that is. Joseph Ratzinger was ordained alongside his brother on June 29, 1951 in Germany. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.